Yeah, well,
second pattern.
You see, the reason I got this, Tom, was because of Apocalypse Now. That movie changed my life.
Apocalypse Now. So this is a XM16, but we'll go into actually that's quite good. It's got the correct. It's quite a good replica, this one.
Yeah, it's even got the right colour receiver.
Because most Vietnam replicas are pretty bad. Right, so what we're going to do today is talk about the US service history of the AR rifle. So that's not assault rifle, that's Armalite rifle. And particularly the Armalite Rifle 15, which is what most people call...
Yeah, and we'll touch on its predecessors, but we'll gloss over that a little bit.
Yeah.
And,
so we'll start right at the beginning. Now, let's bear in mind as well that neither of us are weapon historians. We're kind of enthusiastic amateurs.
Tom, you clearly know more than me about this. I mean, I think my knowledge of the these rifles pretty much ends at Vietnam and then starts again with DeMarco's about 2014.
I know a little bit more than Gadge, but bear in mind, we'll probably get things wrong. Feel free to tell us in the comments. I'm not going to go really exact on dates because I'll end up having to refer to books all the time. So we'll sort of do, you know, first half of the 50s, second half of the 50s sort of stuff. So let's start at the beginning. And the beginning is even before Armalite existed. So let's talk about the M1 rifle in World War II.
Which I think Patton called the finest battle rifle ever made, or the weapon that won World War II.
Yeah, along those lines. We'll put the quote downstairs. That was the first kind of, well, it was the first issued semi-automatic rifle.
General issue to everybody.
General issue. There were some before, and there were some fully automatic rifles issued before.
And the Russians and Germans had a go, but no one was giving one to everybody.
But yeah, the Americans pretty much issued everyone, apart from the Marines, which always get the shoddy end of equipment. US Army General Service weapon was the M1 Garand.
Yeah.
They're firing 30-06 round, big old...
Huge man stopping round.
Yeah.
8-round M-block clip, is it?
M-block clip. They did think about putting a magazine in, but they considered it that the troops would fire too much ammo. Yeah. So they stayed with the M-block clip.
There's myths about the Garand, but I think it's safe to say we can move on by saying it was setting the pace for a large rifle caliber, semi-automatic, general infantryman's weapon, which pretty much everyone had to match that. I know the British took a long time to get there.
Okay, and that went into Korea. Coming out of Korea, there was a US Army requirement to pretty much replace a whole suite of weapons.
Oh, the light machine guns,
so they wanted
everything,
to replace the BAR, the M3 submachine gun. They wanted to replace the general service weapon. They wanted to replace the carbines, all with one gun, which was ended up being the M14. Now, there's a whole load of stuff with NATO service, with the NATO trials. Yeah. We won't go massively into that in this video.
We've touched on that in the past, but needless to say, the Americans wanted a particular caliber, and they got it, which turned out to be a very heavy round again.
760 by 51 NATO, which is pretty much a cut down 30-06 round.
And again, with the M14, if you consider it's designed to replace a lot of weapons, so it is the requirements were huge. So originally, some of them were designed to be fully automatic versions of bipods, which were essentially uncontrollable if you didn't have it locked down on the ground.
Yeah, it was meant to replace everything from a little submachine gun up to a great big BAR. And it really was not the gun that they wanted it to be. And there was also a load of politics about keeping Springfield Armory going and making it.
But it still goes on into early days of Vietnam.
It does. Yeah. So that's the really early stuff. Let's talk about Armalite.
Yeah.
Okay. So Armalite was set up by Fairchild Aviation as a division, and their aim was effectively to bring modern manufacturing, modern design processes, modern materials into
the ergonomics as well,
and all part of that into munitions and rifle manufacture. So they created Armalite, as I say, as a division of Fairchild. They employed a few designers, most notably now Eugene Stoner.
Yep.
And they made so the AR-15, which is what we're talking about today, which people will call the M16 or call the M4, most known these days, was the 15th design. So Armalite rifle -15, the 15th design that Armalite produced. So the Army had already realised that the M14 was not the way to go.
Yeah.
And they'd started another programme which was to increase the lethality of infantrymen.
Yeah.
So they wanted to increase the probability of hit, they wanted to make the hits more lethal, they wanted the infantrymen to carry more ammunition.
And decrease the weight of the actual weapon and the ammunition.
And that was a massive programme.
Yeah.
Okay. But it was going to take a long time. So they started looking around for a lighter weight weapon. And there was another program going on as part of that other program, which would develop a small caliber, high velocity round, which turned into, after, again, we could do a whole episode on that, but airsofters would find it really boring, the 5.56.
Yeah.
Okay, which is a tiny little round going very, very fast. Because it goes very, very fast, it shoots very, very flat. Because it shoots very, very flat, it's much harder to hit, much easier to hit things with it.
And there is a score of myths about these, about tumbling and metax effects and stuff, which really
We'll
go into
kind of go into that in development, because it's part and parcel with the development of the AR-15. We need to go back again though and talk about AR-10.
Okay, tell me about AR-10.
So the AR-10 was meant to be and was designed as a competitor to the M14 in trials. So it was a 7.62 by 51 full bore battle rifle, very much like, and we'll show you some pictures, an AR-15.
So we're looking at modern polymers, modern machining techniques.
It was still like fiberglass, but it wasn't wood. Okay. It wasn't steel. It wasn't wood. It was aluminium forgings and machining. It was
because wood has its problems in that, one, it warps with time, and secondly, in the threat of oncoming chemical and nuclear warfare, which is something that's in the minds of people after the dropping the atomic bomb, you can't decontaminate wood.
Okay, so the AR-10 was submitted to those trials. It wasn't ready yet. So it wasn't.
That's a surprise.
It was in its kind of pre-production developmental phase, so it had problems. Also, in US service, they wanted a steel and wood gun. That was just, and they wanted a target rifle because that's just kind of the way the mentality that worked at the well. So this, what we have here, is an airsoft replica of a pretty early pattern M16. This is technically an XM16. So the first US people to adopt the AR-15 were the US Air Force. Yeah.
Is there any truth in the myth that it was also designed to be given to ARVN forces because the M14 was too heavy?
It wasn't designed as, but it was very much thought of as a good idea. So when you got a big, massive 11-pound wooden steel M14, which is getting on for 4 feet long, giving that to a Southeast Asian soldier is just not a great idea. So they were using M1 and M2 carbines.
Right, yeah, that makes sense.
And Thompsons, even though they're actually quite heavy because they were smaller. And so they wanted to supply them with more modern weapons.
Right, so there is some truth in it.
So there is some truth in it. So it wasn't designed for them, but it was certainly, they were some of the earliest users of a rifle like this. Because as it was originally designed, these are like 5.5, 6 pounds. So in modern times, 2 and a bit kilos.
Which is crazy light compared to a battle rifle at the time. Really,
really light, going for half the weight. And that was always the point. And that caused some compromises, which we'll get into later. But they ended up with, for the time, very modern materials, early composite polymers, fiberglass, pencil barrels, aluminium receivers, which was one of the big deals, separate stocks, and all sorts of stuff. Okay, so let's just go through some of the features of why this was quite so revolutionary. Yeah. Okay, so we've already talked about the use of polymers. Yeah. Even the early FALs and stuff, you had wood up until quite later on the development cycle. One of the most notable bits is it's what's called inline. Yeah. So the muzzle, all the way through the action, all the way through to the stock, where the stock would hit the shoulder, is a straight line.
As opposed to the drop stock on a traditional battle rifle.
Which means it recoils backwards. Yeah. Okay.
Rather than upwards.
Rather than doing so, it does do a bit of flip, but fundamentally, most of the recoil is going back.
But the trade-off is your sight posts have to be much higher.
Which means you have the sight posts. Now, commonly to popular belief, this is neither a carrying handle nor a sight post riser. This originally was because the charging handle was in here.
Okay. Yep.
So I'll show you again.
Never knew
pictures. Yeah. So effectively, the charging handle was in here, and they needed to protect it, and it had the added benefit of having the sights up because they needed raised sights up above the sight radius. If you grab the Enfield over there, Gadge, we'll show you a very traditional way of doing it.
Wood, steel, and heavyweight.
So this is a DIAC number 4 Mark 1.
And US made, I believe.
Canadian
made. There we go. Yeah.
So you can see that the barrel is quite close to the sights, so the bore offset between the sights and the barrel is quite low. However,
it drops
and they are in action. It drops down, so the head can get in behind the sights, which means and the shoulder goes here, which means as it recoils, it's going to go up more. And
very much same with the AK series.
Yeah, AK is the same. M14 is the same. Yeah. I'll give that to back again, and that's very made of wood and steel and everything else. Okay, so it's again very lightweight. Aircraft aluminium forgings. So this was, you know, we're talking about the 50s. This
is pretty. This is cutting edge.
This is cutting edge stuff. Aircraft grade aluminium. So these are forged, hot forged, big hot lumps of metal. They're not cast. So you get a big hot lump of metal, and then you whack it with shaped hammers. Yep. Until it gets in, and then they get in, put it in a machine tool, and the machine tool does all the machining to do all the finer detail. But effectively, you have 2 lumps of metal. That was pretty revolutionary. I mean, they were doing forgings, but it was all done in steel.
But you can understand why the US Army at the time was sceptical, because they were so used to wood, big heavy rifles, and that's why they called it the little black rifle.
This looked like something that was, you know, this looked like something out of the space age. Because it was completely different. Again, very small round, absolutely tiny compared to, but again, shoots flat. People can carry more of them. It weighs less. It's harder. It's easier to get a hit. What you talked about earlier with the yawing and the exploding is early examples had a twist rate in the barrel, which made the bullet fly just on the edge of instability.
Right.
So as soon as it hit something,
it didn't have a drilling effect.
It didn't drill. It started tumbling.
Yeah.
That was changed later. Box magazine. The M14 had replaceable box mags, but again, this was.
But 20 rounds.
But 20 rounds.
And I remember that being a criticism. I remember reading an account from a US Marine Major who felt that when they were going up against AKMs and AK-47s and Type 56s with 30 round mags, it was hard to sustain the firefight.
Yeah. The original had 25. I think it was changed to 20, so it was 2 stripper clips.
Yeah.
Simple as that, really. And also there was a bit in the curve, and it took them a while to work out the exact curve for the 30s, which came in later. But you always see these.
It's important for the feed, isn't it?
You always tend to see 30s in a lot of movies, but these came in quite late. Really simple stuff like the mag release was it's very ergonomic, and that's one of the things they did, a massive ergonomic study. Very easy to get to the controls. Everything's under.
Yeah, you can flip that selector without taking your hand off the.
Yeah, so the whole point was to keep the firing hand on the grip, and do pretty much every single action you need to without having to take your hand off the grip. Yeah. Okay, the bolt release again. There's a feature this had. Some rifles had, some rifles didn't. When it was empty, the bolt hangs back, so the working parts of the weapon hang back all the way back here. Put a new magazine in. All we have to do is hit this little button here. This is, if you don't know what this actually is in your
airsoft replica, let the bolt parts fly forward.
So that's all the working parts fly forward. Chambers around, gets it ready. You don't have to cock it, re-rack it.
Which was stolen for a future British rifle we'll talk about at some point.
The rifles like the AK series, once they're finished, they stop forward. You have to put a new mag on and then re-rack it. Yeah. So this is a faster way of reloading. This has a big. Again, we'll talk about the inline. So this has a big recoil spring inside the butt. Yeah. Okay, that's why you don't have, until very recently, folding stock ARs.
It needs to go somewhere.
It needs the recoil spring, and I'll crack open my GHK later on and we'll show you, because it's very close to a real one, how that works. But just imagine a big spring in here and a big buffer weight just to slow down the recoil slightly. Let's just go through a very quick airsofters version of how an M16 works. Okay, so a bullet goes bang, right?
Yeah.
Goes down the barrel. Behind it is a ton of gas.
Yeah.
As the barrel passes this front sight block is also the gas block.
Yeah. And there's escape tubes there, aren't there? To go into.
So there's a little hole drilled. It goes up into a tube, which you can see through the top of this handguard. Runs all the way back into the action. So this is a GHK bolt, but it looks very similar to a bolt carrier and bolt. But it looks very similar to a real.
It's even got like an extraction claw type.
Yeah, so that's the locking lugs.
Yeah.
So the gas from the tube runs all the way from the gas block. This would be hollow on a real gun.
Yeah.
The gas would run down here.
Punch into it.
Into the bolt carrier. So there's an expansion chamber here that fills up with gas, which pushes this backwards.
And we'll lock that in place, I imagine.
This is the extraction cycle.
The extraction cycle. Sorry, yeah.
It goes backwards. There's a little cam here, which is what, when it gets to a certain point, it starts turning the bolt, unlocks the bolt, and the bolt then extracts. Wouldn't actually do that on this because it's
going onto the big spring in the back.
And it goes then onto the big boingy spring here. Yeah. Okay.
Which is why I get annoyed with a lot of these cut down airsoft ARs that are literally like tiny pistols. It just wouldn't work.
Yeah, so if you know me, I rant a lot about this stuff, as Gadge says. If it doesn't have a buffer tube it's not going to work if it doesn't have a gas tube.
It's not going to work.
It's not going to work. And I know it's Airsoft, but you know, but there you go.
I like playing army.
So Arvin got some, which was the Army of South Vietnam.
Yeah.
The SAS and the British were some of the first adopters
In
as well.
Australians.
In Australians, because fighting in the jungle with a really light little handy thing. You spend most of your time walking around.
You see a lot of these in Malaya.
Yeah.
Very early ones, and I think they're the early ones even without the forward assist.
Yeah, we'll talk about. I'll talk about that just now.
Yeah.
So, this is the forward assist has always been a bit of controversy around the AR.
And most airsofters don't know what that does.
And most, what does this bolt on? What does this bolt on do? And you quite often see some funny comments on there.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, in one of the very early editions of Counter-Strike, the guy that coded it, did the animations, thought that was the charging handle. So you're charged with that.
Nice.
Actually, the charging handle's actually here. And again, because it was here, when it was here, the hot gases would heat up the charging handle and it would get a bit hot.
Yeah,
that's the only reason it really moved. And so they put it on the back to get this more traditional T-shape. So the US Air Force adopted the M16. The US Army were quite interested, but they really wanted a way of manually closing the bolt. Hence the forward assist. Eugene Stoner thought that was a really bad idea, and most of the guys at Armalite, because the way he saw it was, it's almost like speeding up into a car crash. If something's gone wrong, you don't want to make it worse or get there faster.
By jamming it in, yeah.
So something, if it's not chambering, it's not chambering for a reason. So whacking it in.
But the logic is, if it's a small amount of fouling, it's going to push it past it, isn't it? I think that's the logical.
I think the testing Armalite did said that, and Colt did, so that's absolute nonsense.
Yeah, I can believe that.
There are some reasons. I think what you can do is if you need to rack it quietly, you can rack it quietly and then just ease it closed. That's probably the most sensible one to have it. Does it really matter? Probably not. But so the early Air Force ones didn't have a forward assist. That was the M16. Yeah. The original trials US ones and the first deployed to Vietnam, and the other ones was the XM16. That's because it did have a forward assist. That's what the X basically means experimental. The M16 in Vietnam.
Okay.
Okay, Gadge. So we have got all of this. Let's basically consider that the M16 as adopted by the US Army. So the M16 is the military designation of the AR-15. This sometimes gets confused because when Colt, who took on the license from Armalite to produce the M16, so they paid Armalite a bunch of money and then also a licensing fee. So we'll pay you some money every time we print a new gun. We'll give you some cash as well. And that was always Armalite's plan. Armalite always wanted to be a licensing company. We'd do the development, and then we'll sell the rights to someone else.
They're a design company, not a manufacturer. Yeah. When they do manufacture now, but back then they didn't.
They're now a completely different. Yeah. So the Armalite really in name only. Yeah. But certainly at the time they were set up by Fairchild as a licensing company. That was their job. They sold the license to Colt. Colt took over production for the US Army. US Army gave it designation M16, so rifle model 16. So, but effectively, it was still really a pre-production weapon.
There's also a lot of, again, I'm going to go back to that account from a US major I know, and that I think early models had chrome chambers, etc., and they were told it was self-cleaning because of this, or the cordite would burn off, and then to save money, when the US Army purchased them, they removed that feature for about 50 cents per rifle or something like that.
So when it went into Vietnam, the initial trials were really good.
Yeah.
People loved it. People like Special Forces Group got it. Arvin got it. Generally, the good soldiers got it. Okay, and soldiers that had good officers got it.
And you had to look after
and you had to look after their weapons and had the discipline to look after their kit and had the cleaning, and they all issued cleaning stuff to look after their kit.
Yeah.
Initial reports were great, fantastic. There's loads you can read into this if you want to go into the scandal. It was then rushed into production, and there changes were made. So the changes made to the, as you say, the barrel and the bore were no longer chrome to save money. If you're in a very humid, hot environment, rust and corrosion is quite a big deal. There weren't enough cleaning kits. So a lot of people weren't trained on the M16. They were trained on M14s.
Yeah.
They got to Vietnam, got to their service centre, and were given one of these. They'd never trained on it. They'd never been taught to clean it. They'd been taught to look after it, and they'd barely fired it. And they'd been used to their big, heavy wooden steel thing, and suddenly they got a plastic and aluminium, very light gun.
And you know, I mean, like, soldiers never like the new thing. to be honest. Like, if you look at when the SA-80 series was introduced, every old sweat said it was rubbish and crap, and it wasn't like an SLR because it's new and it's not what you trained with. But I don't really want to slag this off because we're talking about how good they are at points. So if you want to know about all the controversy, there's a really good webpage called The Saga of the M16. It's worth reading if you want to hear about it, but it's a bit of a horror story.
The barrels were changed, the barrel spec was changed. One of the biggest things was that they changed the powder. So it was originally, the powder in the 5.56 round was kind of developed for it, to give it proper chamber pressure and cycling rate. So they changed it, which burnt a lot hotter, caused more gas, which caused the cyclic rate to go up, which caused the failure rate to go up, because all the parts which had been specified to work at a certain rate of fire and a certain back pressure and violence of action suddenly couldn't cope anymore.
Probably worth noting at this point as well that, well, obviously they're very, very brave men who fought in Vietnam, but a lot of them were young lads without a lot of training, and the default way of firing, and you'll see this on footage, was just to go full auto all the time, and these rifles aren't designed to do that.
No, these are not sustained fire guns, and we'll come and again. That pops up again and again and again. These are meant to be shot at a maximum rate of about once every 2 seconds.
And that full auto is for getting out of dodge. It's someone's on top of your trench, or you're about to put an assault in.
So a lot of them jammed like crazy, and there was a huge scandal which took a long time to get sorted. And we won't bore you to tears with all of that.
So check that webpage I mentioned earlier, and
it goes on forever.
Yeah.
So there were some revisions. Eventually things were chromed, bolts were chromed, barrels were chromed, bores were chromed, they changed the material. There were some other issues, just little bits and bobs. As Gadge already talked about, this mag release is really easy to knock as you're walking along, because there's no real protection. And then by the time you get into contact, you've got no magazine in.
But the problem is, when you have these early issues and they go into service, as happened with the SA-80, it rocks the confidence in the weapon with soldiers. So it's very hard to build that. So essentially, Colt have then got an uphill barrel now to give you an uphill battle to give you a rifle. Sorry, Freudian slip there. A rifle that you can rely on.
A few things like the flash hider. So this was a really good flash hider, but the open tines. So we got 3 prongs. A couple of issues. One of them, they can catch on undergrowth, and you can rip a thing off. It also let rainwater. The way these were orientated and it was open, let rainwater down into the bore. So if you're walking along,
high port,
with water coming down into your barrel the whole time. The diameter of the barrel is enough that if water gets in, it doesn't come out. You need to
physically sponge it out.
You need to open the bolt and let it drain. Whereas a 7.62, it will get in and it will just come straight out again. So there were a few revisions done. So I don't have the full revision rifle. What we do have though is a G&P M653, which has the slightly later.
We can see a lot of the major changes.
Yeah, so this has a lot of the changes on it. In fact, most of them. So what you'll see here, Gadge, and I'll show the guys at home, is we have fencing. So the really early ones didn't even have this bit of fencing here. The fencing is the raised sections you see around stuff. And this was either a screwed-in pin or it wasn't captive. These are captive pins. So again, if you're trying to clean a rifle and you take a pin out and put it down, you can lose it, and then you can't use your gun. So they changed it to a captive pin. Captive pin literally means as you
only goes out so far,
and then it stops. So that fence, that one, stops that captive pin falling out. They put a fence around the magazine well, so you can't catch it.
So you're not leaning against cover and you just drop it out or something.
One of the other things, if you look at the flash hider,
it's a bird cage type.
So this is called the bird cage. It has 6 ports. That also changes later on, but effectively that means it's less rainwater ingress and much less likely to catch it. There were lots of stuff that happened incidentally along the way. Incrementally. So the A1 effectively was just a tidying up of all those little changes.
Because you do see some real mongrel guns, don't you? You actually see A1s that have got those prong flash hiders on armoury specials.
The Air Force still have a right old load of.
Because you will see people, especially Vietnam reenactors, go, you have to have this and you have to have that on your gun. Now they are the norms, but you will see hybrid guns.
There were lots of A1s with 3 prongs, and there were lots of A1s with these receivers. There were lots of. It was a real mishmash. They were just making stuff. We're at war. They were making rifles.
You're not going to bin several thousand receivers because they're not quite to the spec you want them to be.
So that was the A1. Still had a pencil barrel. Still had the same profile, quite thin barrel to keep the weight down. Still had everything else. There were some minor changes to the way the sling points, but effectively it was still the same gun.
Your foresight and your bayonet lugs are pretty much the same, aren't they?
Yeah, this was all the same stuff. What we will get into right now, before we move on to the A2, is kind of the Carbine program.
So we've got a very lightweight,
Yeah.
relatively compact assault rifle for a smaller soldier, or even a soldier who wants to carry less stuff,
Yeah.
less ammunition, but it's not good enough for everybody, is it?
If you're a helicopter crew or a signaller or a driver or an artilleryman, or you're a captain, you're a commander, you're not a teeth arm, you're not shooting people.
Not shooting all the time, it's just a self-defense weapon you want.
You want something smaller and lighter. So a lot of them still carry carbines or grease guns, but actually if you want a proper rifle...
Well, consider special forces in the early days of Vietnam, they're using MP40s and Sten guns and things like that because there's no small, compact...
So there's the whole CAR-15 program, which is the Carbine Armalite rifle, -15 program, which later gets called the Commando.
Yeah, Colt Commando, XM177E, whatever.
So the XM177E2, the XM177E1, the original CAR-15, none of those were ever officially adopted by the US Army.
They're all essentially trials
They're all
on a big scale.
Commercial off the shelf or trials or experimental rifles. Nothing fundamentally wrong with those guns other than they were less reliable than the main gun. And they were less reliable because earlier we talked about the gas system. Well, the gas system in a carbine, this is actually a carbine length gas system in this one. You can see that the front sight post and the gas block and the gas tube are all shorter.
Yeah.
And that had the effect of increasing the cyclic rate. If you increase the cyclic rate, things moving faster, things that move faster tend to go wrong faster.
There is that. I mean, again, we're going to talk vaguely about airsofters. A lot of airsofters love this rapid rate of fire. In real assault rifles, you don't want that because it makes them uncontrollable, then they wear out fast. Yeah. Ideally, you don't want a cyclic rate of fire much more than 600 rounds.
They also recoil harder.
Yeah.
If the working parts are moving faster, they're going to recoil faster. Yeah. So it makes it harder to hit things. Yeah. So as you say, so the original M16 was spec'd at about 750. Ended up being about 900 because of the powder issues.
Which is high.
Some of the CAR-15s went up to 1100.
Which is almost like an MG42.
Really,
That's
really
crazy.
high. So the guns broke.
Yeah.
And it took a very long time for the CAR-15 program to come to its culmination, which we'll talk about when we get onto the M4. You'd think this is a Vietnam era gun. It's not, but it is part of the CAR-15 program. But you would do if you watch Platoon.
Close enough, don't they? Yeah.
Because Elias and Barnes, the sergeants, used this. This is the M653 we kind of pulled out earlier.
And they use that as a stand-in for an XM177.
Yeah, they didn't have any. All the guns from Platoon came from another army.
It's the Philippines
or something, isn't it? Philippine army stuff. And this is what they had, so this is what they used. This is why
the principle's the same.
The principle's the same, so it's shorter. The whole gas system front end is shorter. One of the main things they did, they finally got around to this sliding stock. There was a few iterations before they got to the whole sliding stock idea. There's some really weird mechanisms on the back, but this is the way they did it. But they had to keep the buffer tube, as we showed earlier with the spring.
It
and
just
the buffer
won't work
weight.
without it.
That's the way it works. It stays in here. And the original sliding stock was made of aluminium and then coated in plastic. Whereas on this replica, it's what this should be, but they're remarkably hard to find. So this is a plastic one.
So I do find this fascinating because obviously for a lot of airsoft, they'll just go, "Oh, that's just an M4."
Yeah.
You know, where it's not. It's an intermediary step because the M4 is a successor to a later rifle that's got nothing to do with that, really.
Yeah. Right, so there's another carbine on the wall up there. We'll get onto that when we get onto the A2. It's an M753. This M thing basically means model. So it's Colt M653. So the 653, effectively the 6 is the M16A1 series, which is this one, and then the 7 series is the A2 series. So then we'll get onto the A2.
The A2.